Hello everyone. I hope everyone will give Doug Waller here a warm welcome to Stark County. And he is the author of 5 books, soon to be 6. And he is also one of the founders of the Ohio Society for Bigfoot's Investigations. So give him a warm welcome. Thank you.
Well, my name is Shauna Parks, and as Danielle said, this is Doug Waller. He's going to be doing the speaking today. We're 2 of the founding members of the Southeastern Ohio Society for Bigfoot Investigation, which is a big long mouthful. So for short, we call it SOSB. We started investigating, the 2 of us together, in 2006. We discovered that we had like a mutual interest in the Bigfoot phenomenon, and so we live down around Salt Fork State Park in southeastern Ohio, and there is a long history of Bigfoot sightings down there. So when we started investigating, we primarily focused on Salt Fork a lot. We also went 1 county over to Coshocton County, which also has a history of Bigfoot sightings. And I believe it was in 2012, Doug started getting invitations to speak at events like this at libraries or civic groups. And in doing those, he started meeting a lot of eyewitnesses who had been afraid to come forward and tell their stories. And they started telling Doug their stories. And he decided to start writing these stories down and has eventually started putting them into a collection of books. He's up to 5 books now. He's got a 6th one coming out later this year. It's at the publisher right now. And he's going to talk today a little bit about the history of Bigfoot in Ohio, evidence that's been found, and he's also going to tell several Bigfoot eyewitness stories. So I'm going to go ahead and let Doug take it away.
Thank you, Shauna. And if anybody in the audience has had an encounter or sighting and wants to talk about it, we'll give you a chance today. If you've had something happen and you're not comfortable talking about it, but you want me to know about it, we have some, hold one of those forms up. If you fill one of those out with your name and phone number, I'll get a hold of you on the phone and you can ask any questions or tell me what happened at that time. And we'll save some time. We might do this after the program or even during the program. If anybody has any questions, you know, it's a small group, it's very informal, just raise your hand and we'll call on you. Well, let's start with the history, evidence, and eyewitness accounts of Bigfoot in the state of Ohio. The Native Americans were the first to encounter the Sasquatch creatures on the North American continent as evidenced by ancient cave drawings and totems. And before you change that, I'm on Facebook and, you know, a lot of Bigfoot groups and stuff, and there was a new person to the field that asked a question the other day, and they said, I'm curious about how you refer to Bigfoot in the plural form. Is it Bigfoots? Is it big feet? How do you say it? What I always did was I inserted Sasquatch in place of Bigfoot. So I said that the guy saw 3 Sasquatches, because that sounds a lot better than I saw big feet, I saw Bigfoots. But it's generally, Bigfoot is considered correct if you're talking about one or you're talking about more than one. Leif Erikson, 986 AD, when the Vikings came to the New World, Leif Erikson wrote in his journal about encountering these creatures, and they referred to the Sasquatches as Skelring, which loosely translates as barbarian. Now, the first documented Ohio Bigfoot sighting was from January 1869 in Gallia County, Ohio. And this was taken from a newspaper, and it said, Gallipolis, Ohio is excited over a wild man who is reported to haunt the woods near that city. He goes naked, is covered with hair, is gigantic in height, and his eyes start from their sockets. He attacked a carriage containing a man and his daughter a few days ago. He is said to have bounded at the father, catching him in a grip like that of a vice and hurling him upon the earth. falling upon him and endeavoring to bite and scratch him like a wild animal. Well, the daughter got out of the carriage and picked up a rock and threw it and hit the creature, and it took off into the thicket, and that was the end of it. But this is the first recorded incident in the state of Ohio, 1869. Now, the BFRO was established by Matt Moneymaker in 1995. Now, are you able to get on that right now?
Mm-hmm.
If any of you are interested in, well, how many sightings have we had here in Ohio? How many have we had in Stark County? This is all you need to know. And I will say that the BFRO sighting reports are different from what I have up here on my map. The ones that I have on here are just ones that I uncovered by people calling or emailing. You know, I didn't go on the BFRO site and cherry pick, you know, stories from there. But Shauna explained to them what they would need to do if they want to find out.
Well, the website itself is bfro.net. Let me back up here a little bit and show you what you have to do to get into this.
And you can use it for any state or any Canadian province or whatever you're looking for.
So here's the home page, and what you want to do is click on the United States, and then you'll find your state, and then you can find your county, which we're in Stark, so let me find that.
It says there's 11 reports on there.
And then it has the month and the year that these occurrences happened, and you can click on those and pull up the entire story and read about them. And just for the record, we're not affiliated with the BFRO. We just use their website as a reference a lot of times, but we're not part of that group.
So it shows 11 for Stark County, and what was it for Ohio at this point?
Let me back up.
And this will change as more reports come in.
We've got 317 total listings for Ohio.
And Ohio was number 5, and I think it's 4 now. It's either 3 or 4, so it's, you know, holding its own in numbers of reports.
Back to the program.
Yeah. Does anybody have any questions on that, if you would want to ask?
That's
Yes.
probably just the ones that are reported from people who don't want to say.
Well, yeah, they say for every report that's taken, there's probably 10 times that many incidents that were never reported. That being because people, when they do have an incident take place and they try to tell somebody about it, quite often they're laughed at and made fun of. So that's what happens. Well, what does Bigfoot look like? Some people report them looking gorilla or ape-like, while others have reported them looking more human. Now, this is a still from the famous Patterson-Gimlin film from 1967, Bluff Creek, California. Now, we're going to show you some drawings and sketches of Bigfoot creatures that witnesses have either drawn themselves or talked to, like a sketch artist at the sheriff's office or police department, and you can see what we're talking about. This is Sibylla Irwin, and she's a very nice lady, extremely talented. She did all these sketches here, and she does this at no charge. And I've sent, I don't know, a handful of witnesses, not personally, but they would call her on the phone and describe, you know, they'll both get their computers on and then get on their phone, and they'll start describing to her what the creature looked like, and she draws, and then they can see it on their computer screen, and they might say make the eyes bigger, make them further apart, or make the nose smaller, until they're finished with, you know, what the thing actually looked like. And if you look through these, a lot of them do look like gorillas or apes, but some of them look like a guy riding down the road on a Harley. Now, Dave Groves, his story is in, I think, my second book, but he had a sighting over in the Allegheny National Forest, Pennsylvania. And this was the sketch that Sevilla did of his creature. These two books were written by David Paulides, who some of you may have heard of from the Missing 411 series of books. Before David wrote the 411 books, he wrote these two Bigfoot books. He had a law enforcement background, and he took a fellow with him named Harvey Pratt, who also had a law enforcement background. Harvey was a sketch artist. And they went to California. They got permission from the tribal leaders of the Hoopa Indian tribe. They received permission to go on the reservation and meet with a lot of these eyewitnesses. And David recorded their stories for his books, and Harvey would draw what the witness told him that the creatures looked like. So now you see what I'm talking about, where some of them look human. Some still look ape-like, other ones look more human. This is one from a very unique creature. This was Oklahoma, the Ina Falconberry sighting. She said the one she saw had eyes like a cat. And that's the only one I've ever heard of. There may be others, but I haven't heard of them that had eyes like that. A lady in Noble County named Lorena Cunningham, who incidentally is, she comes to our Bigfoot meetings and campouts and stuff. She's had 2 eyewitness daytime sightings of Bigfoot creatures, which were not the same creature. Now the sketch on the left is the sketch of this doll that she made up here on the table, and that was from a sighting in 1984, July 2nd. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. It had a body, even though it was a female, because she saw the breasts on it, it had a body like an NFL football player. Big wide shoulders, like they had shoulder pads, you know, tapered down to a slimmer waist, had huge muscles, you know, in its shoulders and biceps and triceps. The one she saw 20 years after that was a completely different color. It was about 9 feet tall instead of the 7.5 that the other one was. And it was built more like a basketball player. It was more long and lanky. And this was not in the exact same place. It was Noble County again, down around Sharon, but it was very close to where the first incident took place. Bigfoot color variations. We've taken reports. Typically, they say the creature was black or dark brown. Oftentimes, it'll have a reddish tint to the hair. I've got a long-haired black cat at home that does that. I think, didn't you say it was from when she's out in the sun? Mm-hmm. Half her head down to like her shoulders is black, and then the rest of her has this reddish tint after she's been out in the sun. Salt and pepper color, that was kind of like the taller one that Lorena Cunningham saw. We've had reports of actual white ones, all sizes, 9 foot plus down to infant size. And if you come up and looked at our casts on the table, you'll see the big fellow on the right over there from Kentucky that they refer to as Goliath. Have you ever heard what he said the height of that one was? I'm sure it would have been 10 foot plus anyway. But we've also got cast of a little small one. I can hold that up. This is from Washington State. So, you know, it gives you an idea. We've actually had people at some of these library talks that came in and thought there was one Bigfoot. And then they said, well, I wondered how they saw it in California, and then 2 days later, they saw it in North Carolina. So, well, there's more than one. But there are, breeding populations, different sizes and different ages of these creatures. Eyewitness sketches. This is one from Donna Ruth from North Carolina? Tennessee. Again, Lorena Cunningham. That's the one over here. The female that she saw at the playground in Sharon, Ohio. Another drawing by Lorena Cunningham of the 9-foot one. She actually had 2 eyewitness sightings and then a third encounter of one that she thinks was the tall, lanky one, but it was in a barn and it was over top of her when she was down below feeding the horses. This is from Ashtabula County from 2013. I don't know what in the world this woman saw, but this is her sketch, and it ran across an open field and was overtaking, it was going to overtake her car. They were coming together like this, and she thought she was going to hit it, and she said she saw it leave the ground like it was jumping. And, she ducked her head thinking it was going to land on the car, which it didn't, and she never saw it again. But I don't know what she saw, whether it was a Bigfoot or a dog man or a goat man or what it was, but this was her sketch. A sketch by eyewitness Dawn Nicely of a, what was that, like 4 feet?
Like a juvenile.
Juvenile from Salt Fork State Park, 2016. Now these sketches here are from Salt Fork. I have a whole chapter in my 4th book, the blue one over there, about all the weird stuff at Salt Fork. But this is a 7 to 10 foot tall creature that was seen on Rocky Fork Road from 2017. Another one from the same weekend by a different person, Rocky Fork Road again. I had a report of a creature that was struck and killed on Interstate 70 over by close to Old Washington. Now, to look at that picture, you would think that the head was knocked clear off, but the reason the head wasn't drawn on there, and again, Sibylla Irwin did this over the phone with the guy, it was laying on its back on the berm as he drove by at like 3:30 in the morning, and he could see the blood and tissue and the big body, but he couldn't see the head. He said he doesn't think the head was missing, but he couldn't see it because the chest was so broad and so big, and it was laying flat on its back. But he said it wasn't a person, it wasn't a bear. He could see the long legs on it, he could see the fingers on the hands and the big feet, and he wasn't able to stop and get a picture because even at 3:30 in the morning the traffic was heavy, and he happened to be on his cell phone with his wife, and he was describing to her what he was seeing, and he was telling her where it was, the area, and he said, I'm so disappointed I can't pull over, but he said, when I get off work, I'm going to come back through here and I'm going to stop and get pictures. And of course, when he was able to come back 8 hours later, it was gone. It was totally cleaned up. There wasn't a hair, a drop of blood or anything. And I got another almost identical story from a book from an author in Maine about a year ago, and I got a hold of her, called her up, and we exchanged books. But it was people on a bus, and they saw, it was at nighttime, and they saw a bunch of all like identical models, making models of SUVs pulled over on the berm. And then beyond them in this field, there was a bunch of like portable lights when you see road crews working at night, these real bright lights. And the lights were shining down on this body, and they had a bunch of men standing around it, and it looked like a big gorilla or something, but we think it was a Sasquatch. The bus slowed down to get through that area, went on down to the next town, dropped off what riders it had, and then she turned around and come back through, and when she come up 30 minutes later, it was all gone, cleaned up, the cars were gone and everything.
Oh my gosh.
So there's some government agency that, you know, doesn't want us to know about these. A sketch by eyewitness John Talmadge from Portage County, June of '72. Okay, Bigfoot evidence. You brought this. I'm not going to read all these, but I'm going to tell you, this is from the foreword of my blue book over there. She'll hold it up. And there's a lot of really good information in there, so we've copied a lot of this. This is, will you read that very first paragraph?
Sometimes while taking a report over the phone from someone who has had unusual things happen around their residence, or maybe even a Bigfoot sighting, I question the person about different things that might have occurred to substantiate their claims of an actual Bigfoot being responsible for what occurred. Often several things happen to back up their suspicions, and equally often there are things that the witness wasn't even aware of until I question him or her further. A number of oft-mentioned incidents and events are listed here.
So we've copied these pages, and we have them over here on the table, and you're welcome to take a copy of that with you. And when I question these witnesses over the phone or in person, and they're telling me what happened, a lot of times they'll start telling me something, and then they'll pause for a moment. And a lot of times I can finish the sentence for them, and they said, "How did you know?" I said, "Well, that's typically what happens when this happens and that happens." And there are a lot of things on the list that they weren't even aware of that might be evidence. So even if you don't want to buy a book and get it in there, you can get a free copy of the foreword over there. Okay, footprints found. Now this is the Ringer property on the left from Guernsey County. This was in Knox Township, Guernsey County, 2007. And on the right is the trackway. And if you look on here, you see how they typically walk in a straight line with one foot directly in front of the other. Now these tracks were 20 inches in length, each footprint, and it was 62 inches from the toe up to the heel of the next one. So that gives you an idea, you know, that's a 5-foot stride, and one after the other. And I tried to duplicate it, and I could get maybe 2 or 3 down before I stumbled and almost fell down in the snow. But that's what legitimate tracks will look like. They'll be in a straight line. And this is another example, the same incident, but this is close to the fence. You have a picture of the fence and everything, or when it got over by
When we get to the story.
When it got over by the fence, it didn't stride out as far because it was on an incline. You know, I suppose it was concerned about slipping or something, but out through the flat part of the yard, that's where the 62 inches was. The Clark property from Guernsey County in 2012, there again you got that straight in-line pattern. These were much smaller. They were about 12 and a half inches, 13 inches. Again, it was in the snow. This was real late winter, real early spring. The guy had been bowling that night, and he came back home and went outside to check on his firewood. Somebody had wanted to buy some, and he found these tracks that went all through the backyard. And what we thought might have happened was he was putting corn out for deer, and he had deer every evening come in the yard and eat that corn, and we think a Sasquatch, and with a 12.5-foot length footprint, it wouldn't be, it wouldn't be an adult male, it'd be more like a teenager maybe. We think the creature was trying to pick one of those deer off for dinner, but there was no evidence of him being successful. But they went all over the guy's backyard, the same foot, 2 feet, the same ones. There was not two creatures, but it went down in a creek and out the other side, in and out and in and out. Quite a bit of activity. And this is not very far from that Ringer property, by the way the crow flies, maybe 5 or 6 miles. Track from Muskingum County, circled on the left. One from Salt Fork that Shauna and I found in '07, and we didn't have a tape measure, so we put a dollar bill down next to it because that shows the size of the step, because dollar bills are like 6 inches, almost exactly 6 inches. And we think there had been a frost on the grass, and then it walked on the grass, and I think there was a trackway. I think there was like three footprints in that trackway. Yeah, these tracks weren't pristine when we were able to go out and check them out after the people called, because it had snowed on top of them again, and the school kids were waiting on the bus in the dark and kind of walked through most of them. Another one from Salt Fork. That one's about 14.5 inches. There it is, showing the width across at the toes. A juvenile track, and that one's even smaller than the one I showed you up here. And that we found on the internet, and it was from the Clendenning Lake area. And y'all know what size one of those little Bic lighters is, so that little fella wasn't very big. Tree structures found. This was the one that Shauna and I found at Salt Fork, and a lot of researchers refer to these as pinwheel structures. Another example from Alberta. There's one from British Columbia that looks almost identical to the one that we have. I don't know if you have it on this.
I don't.
It's in this little
one's it or not.
picture book over here, but it almost looks identical to what we found at Salt Fork. A tree blind structure. This was from Salt Fork as well, and it consisted of a main tree in the center, and then these branches propped up around it, made into like a teepee shaped structure. And none of the ends were cut straight through with a saw. They had been broken. And it was right next to a deer trail, so we think possibly the creature made this, in an effort to ambush a deer. Archway, again from Salt Fork State Park. There's probably some other ones on here too. I know in that little book. Okay, the nests. This was a nest discovered in Kenmore, Ohio in 1995 by researcher Jody Cook and George Clapison. A lot of people call these igloo structures. You could actually, I guess George actually crawled into it. They were looking for hair or tracks, and they were up there on a Bigfoot investigation, and they'd been talking to eyewitnesses about some of the areas where they sighted these creatures, and they found this nest up there. Tree twists. You and I were talking about that. Can you imagine the power something would have to take a live tree and snap it like that? Now, some people, we've had skeptics say, well, that, you know, hell, I've seen that after a tornado goes through. Well, yeah, you will. But if you've got, there's been a sighting in the same area, or you've got footprints, or somebody, you know, heard the screams or howls, and then you've got this, we think this is a, like an alpha male marking his territory. You know, he's showing the other males, you know, this is my woods, stay out of it. You know, he's claiming the females in that area for himself. And we have found some of these, but like the lower left one down there on the Ringer property, we haven't found any great big ones, but some of them I've read about are just huge, and it's just unbelievable how powerful they must be. Dead animals found. This poor doe deer was found by a man from Pittsburgh in March of 2012 at Salt Fork. The mouth had been open so wide it broke the jaws. The belly had been ripped open. The entrails were laying on the ground beside the deer, and the liver was gone. And this is where he found it. This is like a little cave almost. You have other pictures of that? Yeah. Behind him, back in there, is where he found this. This was off one of the back roads in Salt Fork. And we Googled deer kill and Bigfoot, and there were all kinds of stories from the BFRO on people finding deer and sometimes livestock, you know, cattle or sheep or something that were ripped open and the liver was missing. Unusual hair found on fences. This is individual 14-inch hair found on a fence, Knox Township, Guernsey County. This again was from the Ringer property. We found, I won't say handfuls, but we found several pieces of hair. And we submitted some to Melba Ketchum when she did her DNA study years ago, but our hair that we sent in didn't contain a follicle, so she wasn't able to get DNA from it. Plants and landscaping smashed down around houses. You see these bricks, they're laying down on their side. They're supposed to be up on the butt end, you know, like that. But what happened, the lady, this was from Belmont County, her son actually had a couple of different sightings on the property there in her yard. But one night she was laying in bed reading, and she could hear heavy breathing right outside her window. And of course she was afraid to get up, look and see what it was, but I think didn't she hear scratching on the screen?
She heard something tapping on the window.
Tapping on the
Scratching
window.
or something like that.
And when she, you know, she didn't go out that night and look around, but when she went out the next day to look, these bricks had been knocked over and something had stood on that bush and killed part of it. And somewhere we have some pictures of tracks in the snow. They had bird feeders out. So she more than likely had, you know, curious Bigfoot coming in. And, you know, like I told you, they're very curious. And if you're inside the house at night and you have a light on or a TV or a computer screen, you're going to illuminate the interior of the house, and they'll come up and look in. And they're fascinated by children and maybe not quite as much women. I think men, they believe, I think, a lot of times when they encounter man, he's out in the woods with a gun, you know, deer hunting or something. But the lady had, she actually did have a sighting, as I recall.
Oh, partial sighting.
You remember how that went? She came
Well,
home?
she had been in town or something. She came home one night and it was dark. And when she pulled up in front of her garage, she said she saw like a leg sticking out from behind her garage, but it was covered in hair. And and whatever it was ran around the back side of the garage, and it scared her to death. She had to actually pull into the garage and then walk from the garage to her house to get inside the house.
Yeah, I doubt she walked that.
Well, no, I doubt she walked. I mean, I think she told us she ran. She was an older lady, but I think she said she ran. So, you know, and her son did have a sighting on their property.
Yeah, and we kind of lost track of her because she was about 80 years old, I think, when we went down there and spoke with her. And I haven't seen her now for years, so I don't know whether she's still living or whether the creatures still come around that house and, you know, take a look around. But okay, handprints found on vehicles. This was an actual handprint on the side of a guy's vehicle. I think it was a Chevy Blazer. They were over at Salt Fork at, you know, real late at night, listening for screams and wood knocks and things, and they were getting some activity, you know, some vocalizations. And when they were leaving the area, they were driving out, and the man reported hearing something hit the side of the car, and one of the occupants in the car said, "You ran over something," and it flipped up and hit the car. And he said, "No, I didn't run over something." He said, "Something hit the car though." And when they got out of the place they were and back up around the marina or the lodge or the cabins where there were lights, they found this big handprint on the side of the car, and it actually dented it too. Unusual. Oh, this is from the Ringer property, and I have a Bigfoot diary, a copy. Now, I met the Ringers, Don and Mary Lou, at a Bigfoot meeting back in, I don't remember the year.
2006 when we first started.
1996, when she and I first started. We started doing our Bigfoot research, and we went to one of Don Keating's Bigfoot meetings, and the Ringers were there, and I met them that night, and I contacted them and said I didn't live too far away from them, and I was interested in going out and visiting their property and, you know, talking to them. So Shauna and my wife and I went out and met them again and talked to them. And Don Ringer had this Bigfoot diary that he kept, and I'll just read a few things off of it. It says, October of '85, we moved to country. They used to live down around this same area, and then they moved to Columbus, and then they moved back in '85. January of '89, Mary Lou saw footprints in snow behind wagon shed. Summer of '82, I'm gonna have to put glasses on. Screams in the woods north of house. Winter of '93, '94, very cold winter. Cattle afraid to go into the barn. '94 summer, heard tremendous scream in woods south of house one evening at dark. Date unknown. January of '94, approximately 9:30, wood on wood. Same thing again in August. Another date from August, Sunday evening, about 9:30. Mary Lou was in town, screams in driveway beside house. And he had a fan running in the window, and he could still hear this thing screaming. So just one thing after the other. And then when Don passed away, Mary Lou gave me all of his notes in this Bigfoot diary, and I made a copy of it here. And then I kept up with it for a while. She eventually was put into a nursing home and developed dementia, and the property sold to a neighbor out in there, and we kind of lost track. I don't know whether there's still activity on the property or at night, but they would get, they had about 10 or 12 head of Black Angus cattle on the property that Don's brother kept there. And there was at least 2, maybe 3 or 4 incidents where the cows wouldn't go into the barn in the winter. You know, there's nothing to eat in the pasture in January, so they had to be fed. And Dawn or Mary Lou would go into the barn to, you know, start feeding the cows, and they were afraid to come in. What, you know, why won't they come in? And then they looked down, saw these big tracks where something had been in there, and then walked back out. And they were, you know, the cattle were afraid to go in. Bigfoot behavior, intimidation. Like I said, if you were to encounter one, let's say you're hiking through the woods and you encounter a Bigfoot and it wants you to leave, here's some of the things that it might do to get you to leave. Screaming, rock or log throwing. They might push trees over, shake a tree, growling, chest thumping, stalking, swaying from side to side, or producing that horrible odor that some researchers say smells like rotten eggs or sulfur. It's been described that way, or as feces, or dead animal, or a strong
Wet dog.
wet dog. Every bit as strong as a skunk, but kind of different. Okay, any questions before we go to some stories? Any questions about anything we've covered so far? Does anybody have a story of their own they want to discuss, or a sighting, or do you know somebody that's had something happen? Okay, well, let's go to some of the stories. This one is from Dillon State Park over in Zanesville. This took place February of 2021. I got an email from this fellow on the right. He's a school teacher in Newark, and he and his family had been down to Zanesville shopping, and they were headed home, and they went out 146 past Dillon State Park, and the oldest boy was on the track team, and he was telling his dad that he needed to get out of the car and do some running, you know, some practice, because his legs were getting stiff and he needed to limber up a little bit. So they pulled into the beach area of the state park, and what was that guy's name? Fred? Yeah. Fred and the oldest boy got out, and the mom and the younger boy stayed in the car. So the boys running laps across the parking lot. Now, when we took the pictures, there was more snow on the ground. It was, what was that, February 21st or something, 23rd? This was some weeks later than that, but there was still a little bit of snow on the ground. But when Fred was down there was maybe an inch. So he had to use the restroom. So he walked over, and of course it was locked. So he went around on the back side of it. There was only one other car in the parking lot, but he didn't want anybody to see him because he was going to pee in the bushes on the back of the restroom because it was locked. So as he's doing that, he hears this noise way off. Now, can you play? This is what he was hearing.
Turn my little speaker on so everybody can hear it.
Power on. Bluetooth pairing. Bluetooth connected.
I lost it. Bear with me.
Is this on the BFRO page? that's known as the Ohio Howl, or Columbiana County Howl. And BFRO recorded that in, you remember what year that was?
1994.
1994. And so that's what Fred was hearing as he was standing there after he just urinated in the bushes. He turns his head, and over on that bank, now remember there's a little bit of snow on the ground. He could see this dark creature in those woods. And he could see it opening its mouth and kind of tilting its head back and making this vocalization. And so he, he's thinking, what in the world is that? So he actually walked closer. Do you have the picture of that table again? He walks closer to where he's behind this picnic table, and this is kind of elevated where the table is. It goes over the bank and drops down. And he got closer, and he's standing there watching it. Well, then he noticed there was another one with it in front of it, and it started moving, and they started going from right to left across that bank, going uphill. And at first he thought the bigger of the two was about 6 feet, and the other one was maybe 4 feet. Well, they walked up into that woods and finally disappeared in the heavier brush up there. So he got a hold of me, and we made an appointment to meet out there, and I went with Shauna. Didn't go. I called a friend of mine named Dusty Ruth, who's in the BFRO. He's an investigator. And Dusty and his son Wesley met us, and Fred, the witness, met them over at Dillon. And we questioned him and got his story again, took a bunch of pictures, and I think Wes might have taken some video, but since Wes was the youngest one, we had him walk clear around over there to that bank, and that's him in the blue. And then his dad and I were taking pictures and video of him. And after seeing Wes over there, the witness, Fred, said, well, that thing I saw must have been a lot bigger than what I thought. He said it must have been more like 8 feet tall, and the one with it might have been 5 or 6 feet. But that's the second report that we've taken from Dillon. And if you look on the BFRO page, there are some other ones from over there as well. And that story will be in my book that's coming out. Next story, Arrowhead Ridge encounter. This took place in Ashland County, up around Mohican State Park. And these two women rented this little cabin. And if you look at the picture, the cabin actually, there was a moonshiner that lived there years and years ago. And this man that owns it now, I don't know how he acquired the property, but he built a screen porch, attached it to the structure. However, you can't walk from the cabin right onto the porch and vice versa. You have to exit the cabin through the main door and then walk around on this side, and then there's a door, I think, in the middle to go up on the screen porch. So if you're on the screen porch and you want to go to the cabin, you have to do the same thing, just backwards. So the two ladies showed up, and it was close to dark when they got there. They parked their car about 100 yards, 200 yards away, and the man that owns the property and rents it out took them in one of these John Deere Gators. He got the ladies seated, and one of them had her little dog and their clothing and food and stuff. They drove out to the cabin, and he carried the stuff in, and he said, I'll see you. I think they were there for 2 nights and 2 days. So since it was dark, just getting dark, they didn't venture outside or anything that night, but they fixed something for dinner and set up and talked and stuff. So when it was time to go to bed, one of them was out on this is a screen porch. One of them was out on the porch. The other one is inside the cabin, and she had the little dog with her. Well, it was about 11 o'clock. They started hearing what she thought was, dogs were barking way off. And then she heard what she thought was walnuts hitting the roof of the cabin. And the two gals are whispering through the walls of the cabin, said, "You hear that?" "Yeah." I said, "Well, what is it?" "Sounds like walnuts or hickory nuts hitting the roof." I said, "Well, it must be what it is, so don't worry about it." So eventually it started raining, and then they were able to, block everything out, and they went to sleep. So when they got up the next day, they went outside, and they found a little fire pit area down below the cabin, and you see that drops off, goes down the hill, and there's a creek or a very small river or big creek winds through there. But one puzzling thing that they discovered was there were no walnut trees or any other kind of trees right next to the cabin where something dropped. So she's wondering, well, what in the devil was making that noise? Because it sure sounded like nuts. So they, did some sightseeing and, hiked around and stuff. And when evening came, they ate their meal and they went to bed again, one of them out on the porch and the other one inside in the sleeping bag with the little dog. Well, they started hearing barking again and howling noises, just like what Shauna played a few minutes ago, the Ohio howl. And it was way off. But they could hear it. Well, then they heard it again, and it was closer, like it was coming towards the cabin. Well, the lady out on the porch was terrified because she's out there all by herself, and she can't just jump into the cabin. She's got to get clear outside and walk around and come in the door. And when she heard the noises, she's asking her friend through the wall, she said, "What kind of bird is that? Do you think it's an owl?" And the one inside said, "I don't know what it is," but she knew it wasn't an owl making those noises. So the thing kept getting closer, and somehow the lady inside with the dog was able to finally go to sleep. And I asked her over the phone, I said, "Well, when this was happening, what did the dog do?" And she said, "Well, I got to tell you," she said, "normally if something like that happened, if the dog would hear a noise or something outside, he would jump up and go to the door or the window and look out and bark, and just raise Cain. But not that night. He stayed clear down at the bottom of the sleeping bag in between her feet." So she turned her light on and was shining it through the window or the screen and didn't see anything out there. As a matter of fact, she said she went to sleep with the flashlight on all night. So the other lady on the porch never slept a wink all night. She was scared to death. So morning couldn't come quick enough for her. So when it finally did, they got up and they got dressed, and that's the day they were going to leave. So they got everything packed up, and the man that had dropped them off showed up, and they put everything in the gator and went back up to the car. And they were telling him what had happened, and he told them it was a raccoon. And they didn't believe for a minute that it was a raccoon, but there have been sighting reports from up around Mohican State Park in that area. Okay, our next story, the Deer Ridge Lookout encounter. This was Idaho, 1990. Okay, now if you look at that structure there, this is a decommissioned fire tower that I guess the rangers don't actually set up in there and watch for smoke anymore, but they rent these things out to people, and they'll come out and actually sleep in the structure, and they can camp, and they get a lot of people that like to like astronomers, they like to stargaze because you don't have any other light interference from houses or anything. So there were two fellas, and he said that they went to the ranger station and got the key, and they drove to where the gate was. They got out, unlocked the gate, drove through, and then shut the gate and locked it. And it was, I think, a 45-minute drive from the gate clear up to where this tower was. So there's a lot of acreage there. So the first, this is the interior of the place. It's 14 by 14. It's 40 feet in the air, and it's anchored down by guide wires. And pretty nice. And they've got a big journal in there, a big notebook that people will sign in and anything that may have taken place while they're there. And you can just see for miles and miles. And on the outside of it, it has like a catwalk, that goes clear around. And you can sit out there at night and you don't see any lights, you can watch the stars and stuff. So that's what they did while they were there. Well then, the last night they were there, they were cooking. And I believe he told me, you're not supposed to cook inside the cabin. You're supposed to get down on the ground if you want to cook. But they made pork chops and ate them, and then they threw the bones over the railing. And that could have caused what happened. So show that interior again. They're in there and it's dark, and they've eaten and thrown the bones over, and one of them was laying on a cot, or that might be like a cot or the bed over there, and the other one had a sleeping bag, and he's in the bag on the floor. So they're just about asleep, it's dark, and all of a sudden they hear boom, 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 and the place is shaking. Something is down below and it's running up the steps. Something big. Well, the guy that I did the interview with on the phone, he's the one that I think was in the bed. And he jumped out, he took a 12-gauge shotgun with him, and he puts a round in the chamber, and everybody knows that noise when you jack that thing. And he went to the window, or the door, and went out the door and was watching down the stairs holding that shotgun, because whatever was making that noise was coming up. And there are, can you go back to that first picture of the structure? The steps, it goes up one direction, and then the next flight they go in another direction, and then another one like that. And it's 40 feet high, and you can see the guy wires holding it on. So, they're counting how many steps it's making, and the thing's shaking, and he's ready to shoot. And right about when the thing is ready to get on that last flight, it turned and went back down. And the guy with him actually went after it. I don't know what the hell he was going to do if he caught it. But he went after it. So the man with the gun stood along the catwalk, and he's watching the last flight of steps, and he said, I was going to blast whatever it was, but it never made it to the last flight. It jumped off on the next to last flight and disappeared. So, of course, they didn't get a bit of sleep that night after that. The next day was the day they left, so they got their stuff packed up and went to the car. Of course, there were no tracks of any kind because it was dry and they couldn't find any kind of tracks. He said he had his buddy try to run up the steps and make as much noise and shake while he was upstairs, and he did it. And he said this guy was 200 pounds. And he said that structure never moved an inch. So it was a lot heavier than 200 pounds. So when they left, they're driving back to the ranger station with the key. And when they got there, they were telling the ranger what had happened. And he chuckled a little bit, and he said, oh, you met Maggie. And they said, Maggie? He says, yeah, we call her Margaret. She's named Maggie after Margaret Thatcher.
Oh.
the Canadian, or the
British.
British Prime Minister, because this was about like 10 miles from the Canadian border. British Columbia was just north of there. And the ranger said, yes, she's been down before. Other people have encountered her. And I don't know whether it's they smelled the cooking or they saw, sometimes they had like a lantern lit up there. But said she knows when people are here and she comes down to pay them a visit. So that was their introduction to Maggie. We call this story The Chase. Now this will be in my next book coming out. This is from Hawken County, Kern Road. It's the closest little town is Union Furnace, if you know where that is. It's south of Logan. Okay, this fella that I interviewed was working for the Columbus Dispatch, and they used to have a bag that contained coupons and flyers, sale flyers and things like that. And his job was to drive around and distribute these, and he had Hawken County. And he apparently had another job that he did during the daytime, and he would deliver these bags, that's what it was called, at night. And he would sit, you know, when he drove down the highway, he'd sit on the right hand or the left hand side normally, but once he got to the area where he was throwing them out the windows, he'd slide over in the middle like a mail carrier does, and he'd have both windows rolled down. And as he'd come by your driveway, he'd pitch it out this side or that side. So it's about 1 o'clock in the morning, and he's going down Kern Road and going down this hill, and all of a sudden a handful of gravel hits the roof of the car and down over the windshield, and some of it even went inside and hit him. And he starts hitting the brakes thinking, what in the world is going on? He can hear something or somebody or something running along beside the car, and he's in the middle now. And it gets almost up to the car and he can hear heavy breathing. Well, he hits the gas and he starts down this hill, and he's going 35 to 40 miles an hour, and this thing is keeping up with him. But he couldn't see it out the mirror because he's in the middle, and the mirrors weren't adjusted for the middle. And when he got clear down into this curve, he kind of slid, the car spun around, and he thought, uh-oh, it's gonna get me. But it had run off to the side of the road, one side or the other. He never saw it, and it didn't make it clear to the bottom. So he hurries up and gets the car turned back around facing down the hill. And he didn't see it anymore, but he got off Kern Road, got onto the, I think it's Route 326 or 328, and he got out of there. So I said, well, did you ever, I understand why you left that night, but did you go back and look for tracks? Nope. I said, well, did you ever go back down there again? He said, nope. He said, never went down Kern Road after that. He said, and I still worked for him for another year. He said, I figured those people that lived on down the road, they would just pay full price because they're not going to get their coupons. Because I wasn't driving down that road anymore. So I don't know what, he didn't see it, but I don't think there are too many people can run 35, 40 miles an hour. So what was it? I don't know. But something that kept up with him, and it threw a handful of gravel in the car. Now why? Was it trying to scare him out of there? Maybe it had a young one around or something. I don't know. But that's just one of these weird stories. And we know that Hawken County has a lot of stuff, going on, not just Bigfoot, but we get reports of these dogman creatures from down there too. Lorena Cunningham, now she's the lady that built the thing over here. That was the, I'm going to tell that story that was a female, about 7.5 feet tall. She also built this statue of this creature. That one was about 9 feet tall, and it was a different color, and it was not built like a football player. It was more like a basketball player. But that's Lorena in the red, and the gal with her is Natalie Hewson, and she was the producer for the Finding Bigfoot program. And well, I might as well tell that story too. She called me on the phone, I think it was 2011, and I was actually in my car in line at the bank, the drive-through, and the phone's ringing, and I looked, and it said, I think it said Hollywood. Oh, who in the world?
Said Los Angeles.
Yeah, but I think it said Hollywood
Oh.
on there. And I thought, who in the world's calling me? And I answered the phone, and she says, I'm trying to reach Doug Waller. And I said, well, you got him, but I said, I'm at the bank drive-through, and I'm waited on right now, so can I call you back? And she said, okay. So I got my check cashed and then pulled up and parked. And I thought, who in the world? So I called her back, and she said, I'm Natalie Hewson, and I work for Ping Pong Productions, and she's the producer for the Finding Bigfoot program. She said, are you familiar with Finding Bigfoot? And I said, yeah, Bobo and Cliff and Renee, that's the one. And she said, I'm calling from California, and we're going to be coming to Salt Fork, and we're going to be filming out at the park, and we're going to stay in Cambridge at a hotel for a week. And she said, we found your name on the internet. I thought, thank God they didn't find it in the bathroom somewhere on the She said, no, we found you on the internet, and we just wanted to know if you knew of any Bigfoot witnesses. I said, yeah, I know some. So they made arrangements to come out, and we met with them. They were here for like a week or so. And Lorena had a sighting. That's actually the location right there, and so that's what I'm going to talk about next. But that's how we met. You know, we got to meet all the Bigfoot. We didn't meet Bigfoot. We met Cliff and Renee.
Oh, really?
Yeah, we got our picture in the first book. There's pictures in there of Bobo and I, Renee, and we met all of them really. Got to talk to them. But what happened with have you been watching the program when it came out?
Yeah.
Remember they'd have the town hall meeting and stuff?
Yeah.
Okay, when they had it, did you go to the one, Larry?
No, I seen one that down.
There was like 160 people, and they
Yes,
had
I
it
did.
near Assoc Park. And Tim Stover was another friend of mine, and he's in my book. I think he's in the third book. But Lorena's story's in the first book, and they were both on the program. It was called Buckeye Bigfoot, I think. But this is Lorena's story. She went down and met with, I think, Renee and Matt, and they did a reenactment. But she was on the show. But what happened with her was, this was in July of 1984, and she had, you got pictures of that? Okay, this is an old school building in Sharon, Ohio, Noble County. And I think the Grange owns the building now, and they have meetings there and stuff. But this is what's left of the playground equipment. And Lorena's children were pestering her and wanting to go to the playground on this day in July back in 1984. So she had a baby boy, just a few months old, and then two daughters, and they were like, 4 and 6?
4 and 6 at the time.
So they walked, this is close to her house, within walking distance. So they walked over there, and the two girls are playing on the stuff, climbing around and on the swings and stuff. And Lorena's holding the baby, and she starts hearing noise coming out of the woods. You know, sticks cracking and breaking and something moving. So she walked over to the edge, and she's looking down in the woods thinking maybe a cow had gotten out or something. And she's watching for a cow to come stepping through, and instead of a cow, this is what appeared. Now, imagine, you're a mother and you got your 3 kids out there, and this thing shows up and it's 7.5 feet tall and covered with hair, and it's 3.5, 4 feet wide and huge muscles on it. You're gonna think the worst. You're gonna think, run, but I can't run because my kids are here. And the thing is staring at Lorena and then at the kids. And we went down and interviewed her, and I don't know, it was a 2-hour interview. And I've heard the lady tell the story several times, and she never changes. You've heard it, I'm sure, at some of our campouts and stuff. She never changes anything. It's always the same story. But she said, I said, well, tell me about the facial features. I know you were afraid, the sheer size would dictate that you're scared of this thing. She said, oh yeah, had it wanted to, it could have just pulled my head off. And I said, well, did it show anger? She says, no, it didn't. It showed, it was kind of calming. It was enjoying watching the girls play on the equipment. And this actual sketch that she made was after the second girl had run to her mother. But at first, the 2 girls are off over here playing, and she's 50 feet away, and the thing's looking at her and then looking at the kids and smiling. And at first she's thinking, well, it's gonna kill us and eat us all. And then she's thinking, well, it's gonna kill me, and it's gonna abduct the kids and take them, and raise them for, maybe it had a baby and it died and it's gonna steal my baby. So she had a million things going through her mind, but she said it never showed any anger or hatred or anything menacing. But as I said, the size of it was enough to make you afraid. So Lorena's trying to get the attention of her daughters to get off the swings and come to her, but don't run, walk over here and get behind me. So she gets the oldest daughter over there first, next to her, and that daughter said, Mom, is that Bigfoot? And she's, I don't know what it is, but it could be. Well, finally, the little girl, she figures out, Mom's not watching me anymore. They're looking at something in the woods. So she comes running over. So now Lorena's got all 3 kids right there with her. And the thing's still watching them. I think she said, 35 feet away?
Something like, yeah, about 30 feet away from her.
30 feet away. And she said she could see its chest, when it exhaled and inhaled, she could see the chest moving. She could see the hair on its head when the wind would blow the hair, and see the eyes blink. And I said, tell me about the eyes. She said it had big dark eyes, like a cow. And, but it, never threatened them anyway. So they started backing up, and she said, don't run, just do what I do. We're going to back away, and then we're going to walk out of here. So they started walking away, and the things slipped back into the trees, and they could hear it moving away down through the woods. So they started heading for home, and they came to her grandmother's house first because it was closer. So they went up to Grandma's door, and her cousin, lived there, and he had a Doberman tied up outside. And she thought, well, she felt better when she saw the dog, because she thought that dog wasn't afraid of anything. Well, it was, because it had seen the thing too, and it was digging a hole trying to get under the house and hide. So that was Lorena's first sighting. And I remember her telling me that she reported it to, she called Don Keating, and he came out and did an investigation. But I don't know whether did she call the sheriff's office, or somehow they got wind of it. I think she
Yeah, because then word got out that she had seen a Bigfoot, and people started making fun of her.
Yeah,
kids at
the
school.
sheriff-
Her husband was getting made fun of at work, and
The sheriff's office, they laughed at her, made fun of her, and she said the school bus would pull up in front of the house and her oldest daughter would come running inside crying and saying the kids on the bus said, your mom's a drunk and she's on drugs and all kinds of stuff like that. And her husband took a lot of grief at work, guys saying, your old lady's been hitting the bottle, I heard, and she said, I wish I'd never seen the damn thing, and I wish I'd never told anybody. That was her exact words. But as if that wasn't enough, then 20 years later, she sees another one. It's not the same one. I won't get into that story because we're kind of running low on time here. Now, does anybody have any questions on anything we've talked about so far? Okay. Well, let's move on. Trucker sees Bigfoot cross the highway. This was from February of 2019. This would be on Interstate 77. We went right through there when we come up today. 77 northbound. It was 3:28 a.m. and this guy's driving his semi from Marietta up to, I think, Akron. And he had the cruise control on, and he's got this automatic braking on the cruise control that if it senses something out in front of the vehicle that it's going to hit, it automatically applies the brakes. He was pouring a cup of coffee into the thermos, and that's when the truck slowed down. And he looks up, and this thing's up ahead of him. And this was right about where the Salt Fork Dam is, that low spot there. And if you look over to the right, you can see the lake. And he said it walked from right to left, clear across both northbound lanes, the median strip, the southbound lanes, and then stepped over the guardrail and disappeared.
Power on.
What'd you say?
this thing was
Oh,
talking.
that thing's talking to you?
Yeah, it shut itself off.
Okay. Next story would be, can you go to the spider crawl? Because we're kind of
Yeah.
running out of time here. This one came in about a year ago. There it is. I got an email from this fella, another truck driver from Pennsylvania. He had come down to Guernsey County, got off the Route 22 exit, went out past Salt Fork State Park, delivered the load, and was coming back 22 to get on the interstate. And right about where there's a place called Moonlight, what is that?
Moonlight Swim and Spa.
Moonlight Swim and Spa. There's a big open field and then woods beyond it. So he's driving this semi, and a deer runs out from right to left, followed by another one and another one and another one. And he's hitting the brakes. Now this was in, what was that, January?
January 28th.
Around 5 p.m. He's hitting the brakes, slowing way down almost to a stop. As soon as the 4 deer got across the road, they turned around and went right back across the way they had just come from. He comes to a complete stop. The first three deer, they get across and they turned and went alongside his truck next to the road. The 4th deer went out into that field, that open field. And he's watching it, expecting to see more deer coming. He's sitting there idling at this time with his foot on the brake. He sees this dark, hair-covered, upright thing standing in the tree line, and it's watching that 4th deer that went out in the field by itself. And at first he's thinking it's a hunter, but it's got no orange on. He thought, well, that's not right. Plus, he said the shoulders were gigantic on this thing, just huge. Then it moves from bipedal down to all fours and assumes this position like that he called spider crawl. This is another Sibylla Irwin sketch. And he said the muscles on this thing were like basketballs, the biceps. And he told me later on, even the arms were extended further out, the front, the front arms, than what it was here. It's more like it's under its body. They were extended, stretched out more. It shot out across that field on all fours and got that deer. And he couldn't believe how fast it was. And it really rattled the guy because I talked to him on the phone, got the story, but I was supposed to meet with him 2 different times and get pictures. Now I did take pictures, show that one of the feet, the actual ones I took. I did go out there myself, but I don't know exactly where the thing stood because he wasn't with me. He says, Doug, he says, I don't even like to walk the dog anymore, I'm afraid, after seeing that thing. It really shook him up. So we've got about 10 minutes left. Let's move on to something else, another story. Ed, the Tuscarawas River Bigfoot sighting. This is a picture we took. It was a different season, so the water was up real high and muddy. But when this happened, do you have the date of when that happened?
It was in late summer, early fall, I believe.
Yeah.
When we met the guy, he said it had happened about 25 years before that, and I think we met him in like 2015.
Because the corn was up real high, because corn played a part in this. Ed was at work up in Tuscarawas County, and he worked the midnight shift, and he got off early the next morning, weekday, and it was payday, and his boss said, I got a call from Charlie's wife. Charlie was a coworker, and he had called off sick, and his wife had called and wanted to know if somebody would run his paycheck over to the house. So Ed said, sure, I'll do it. So he's driving down, I think it was Route 36, and you come to that bridge, and it was like a Tuesday or Wednesday morning, like 7:30 in the morning, beautiful weather, not a car in sight. He stops on the bridge and had the windows down, and he's looking out at the river because, it was such a nice morning and nobody around, and he liked to fish. Well, that red arrow pointing to that bank, now remember the water's way up because this was taken in, I think, in the spring. But there was corn growing over there in that field. There's actually corn on that bank and on the other bank too, growing, and it was, like 8-9 feet tall by that time of year. He's sitting in the car and he sees some dark object come out of that cornfield, and it starts down the bank. Now remember, the bank went further down because the water's up. He's watching it go down the bank and he's thinking, well, it's a black bear. Well, when it got clear down to the water's edge, he noticed that it came down backwards. And he said, well, a bear wouldn't do that. But it's not a person because it's all one color. It's black. It turns around, stands up on all, on its hind feet, turns around, and here it's a Bigfoot. And it went in the water and started walking from the left side across. And he's watching this thing, and he said it got in the water, and he said at that particular spot there was a deep hole that was about 6 feet deep. Now he had a chart that gave where the sandbars were and the depth of the water because he liked to fish for smallmouth bass and stuff. And he said when that thing went through that 6 foot deep hole, I could still see from like here up. So it had to be 8 feet tall. And when it got through the deep area and it come up on this sandbar that's out in the middle, I could see the whole thing except from like here down to its feet. And he said it was doing striding, and moving its arms. It had breasts like the one Lorena saw. It was a female. Well, he starts fidgeting around in the car, turned a little bit to look, to get a better look. And it saw him. It turned its head and saw him doing that. And I said, well, what happened when it saw you? Said, oh, she didn't like that. She gave me a dirty look. And I said, well, you caught her skinny dipping, I guess. That's why she didn't like it. I said, well, I said, you know, I'll bet it's crossed there before. I said, I think so too. And he said, I was probably the first one that ever stopped. You know, most people just drive straight through and they don't look, but I actually stopped and was sitting there because it was such a nice day and there wasn't any traffic or anything. He said when it got to the other bank, it pulled itself, it grabbed a tree limb, pulled itself up out of the water, went up that bank and disappeared in the corn on that side of the river. So he left, took the check down, gave it to the woman, and then went home. And I said, well, had you ever reported it? He said, well, not officially. He tried to tell some people at work, and of course they laughed at him. He said, some of them said, well, did you go back and look for tracks? He says, no. I said, well, why not? I said, you could have found, he said, well, I saw the thing. I didn't need to see the tracks. And anyway, he says, that thing wasn't happy with me. And he said, I've had 5-foot females mad at me. He said, I'm not going to go through an 8-foot tall cornfield looking for a 9-footer that's mad at me. And he came to, his story is in, I forget which book, but Ed wasn't his real name. He didn't want his name used, but that story's probably now 30 years ago when that happened. So we're going to have to wrap things up. So does anybody, nobody can think of any question of, you know, anything they want to ask? Our group, our Sosby group has campouts and meetings at Salt Fork. We kind of alternate between Salt Fork and Coshocton County, and we've got one coming up. What'd you say, the 14th?
I think so.
And it's primitive camping. It's only $5 a night to camp, and we have the meeting on the Saturday night. And these events go from Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and then they leave Sunday. So if you want to come, it's only $5 a night to camp. And if you don't spend the night, you don't have to pay. You know, you can just come for the meeting if you want to. But the next one we have is it's mid June. I don't have a calendar with me.
It's the 15th through the 18th, I believe.
And then we have one in July. We're back at Salt Fork. So if anybody would like to come to those, there's no charge for just coming to the meeting.
Do you actually go out and look for Bigfoot?
Yeah, and we actually have a lot of activity actually at both of those places. Have you had anything happen when you stayed at Salt Fork?
Well, Parker Road's my favorite, and,
Yeah.
yeah, it gets about 11 o'clock on, you'll hear noises, and even like 3 in the morning here, we heard them screaming at night,
Yeah, if you just want to come down for the meeting, they start at 7 o'clock and
I can't,
or
unfortunately.
Wood knocks at that time of night, or early in the morning.
I swear I live, there's little teeny woods behind it. I swear I hear woodcocks all the time.
Yeah.
But I can't believe I would actually be hearing them, but
We have a Facebook page, so if you're on Facebook, just look up our group's name, Southeastern Ohio Society for Bigfoot Investigation. And we post when we have events coming up and campouts and meetings and whatnot.
yeah, we've got some cards you can take.
Yeah, if you take one of these cards, the only thing is, we no longer meet at this library that's named on here. He belongs to a sportsman's club in Guernsey County, and that's where they meet in the wintertime every other month, so. But all the other information on the card is current.
Okay, I appreciate you coming. Did you have one more
yeah, just one
question?
quick question. That, you know, where you said you saw Renee and them, Bobo and everything, did that ever make it to TV?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's on there.
Oh, was it? Oh,
You can,
I forget what season of the show it's on, but I think it's one of the earlier seasons, but the episode is called Buckeye Bigfoot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, well, if anybody wants a book, they're $18 and I'll gladly sign it. And I appreciate you showing up and thank you.
Very nice.